All right, good morning, gentlemen. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Why don't we get started with just a quick review of what we were doing on Friday. Was somewhat of a disturbing halacha, I have to confess. Not exactly something that we would have expected, but the Rav Shulchan Aruch says that even though when a government or a king taxes unfairly, you don't have to pay the tax because it's not dina de malchusa dina. The Rav Shulchan Aruch said the exception is if there's a special Jew tax, then the Jewish subjects do have to pay the special Jew tax. And that was very surprising to us. We didn't really understand why that should be. And when we looked in the Biurim, Rav Stern had explained, based on looking at the original commentaries, he said that there's a seeming contradiction within the Ramah itself, because the Ramah says that if the king taxes a certain type of laborer unfairly, like he says, all moneylenders or all bricklayers must pay a special tax. That's considered to be unfair taxation because it singles out a people by their profession, and therefore you don't have to follow. But later on, the Ramah says that if the king imposes a special Jew tax, then as long as no individual Jews are singled out and every Jew is paying the same amount, then that tax is binding. So how do you reconcile that? And so he pointed out that there's another halacha that says, quoting from the Maharik, was an earlier commentary predating the Shulchan Aruch, that if there's a foreign group of non-naturalized citizens who are living in the country, the king has a right to impose additional taxation on people who are not naturalized citizens of the country. So people who are immigrants, right, even though we don't think of it this way because we are used to living in a melting pot society. I'm an American, you're Canadian, and certainly in our two countries, there's a convention that we welcome in immigrants to our country, and we make every accommodation to naturalize them as quickly as possible and make them citizens. But that's a relatively new phenomenon. That's a Western world modern phenomenon, probably not going back before the 20th century. And earlier than that, people who were naturalized of a certain ethnicity were given certain privileges. And if you wanted to live in that country as, let's say, a migrant worker who was coming in to be able to make a parnasa, you were tolerated. You were allowed to come in as a guest, but that didn't mean that you were given all of the rights and privileges of the people who were of that ethnicity in that country, that national ethnicity. And so therefore, his point was that Jews were considered to be a foreign ethnicity wherever they went in various countries throughout Europe. And as a result, it was considered to be fair to tax a foreign ethnicity that was coming into the country as long as no one individual is singled out. And I know it sort of rankles us, right, when we think about it, but that's the basis for how racism, was so. I mean, it sort of is indicative of how racism was so rooted within society before we get to the 20th century. So anyway, I just wanted to leave us with that. And it may have been an issue of practicality to tell Jews, you've got to pay your taxes, even though there's a Jew tax on you. Because if Jews would not have paid their taxes, then there would have been pogroms. The ramifications would have probably been disastrous for the Jewish community as a whole. And thank God we don't live in those times, I suppose. Okay, so we'll start the next halacha. Unless someone wants to comment on this, unless someone wants to reflect upon it, I think we should go on. We're up to Sif Chaf. Anyone else want to say something about this? No. Okay. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch says we're going back to the principles of Gezela and Geneva. Uchashem sha'asr lehanos bedavar hagazel bevadai elalachar yeyosh b'shinei rishos. Just like you're not allowed to benefit from stolen property when you know for sure it's stolen, unless you have two things. You have that the original owner gave up hope and that it's already left the possession of the original Gazlan. So kach asr lehanos bedavar haganov va'afilu enu ganov bevadai. Similarly, you're not allowed to benefit from stolen property. So guzzle and ganov we've already defined multiple times. Guzzle means that it was robbed, at gunpoint or, brazenly robbed from the individual. So the individual already knows who confiscated it from him, but is powerless to stop them, right? So you can't benefit from that. So if a government illicitly confiscates property, you cannot benefit from that. That's what we've been talking about. Similarly, it is usher to benefit from something that is stolen stealthily, right? So that if a person secretly steals, like they're taking stuff from the till of the owner without their knowledge, and then they're trying to sell it on the side, that's what this halacha is talking about. And even if you don't know for sure that it's stolen, but there's a fair assumption based on the circumstances that it's stolen property. If a guy starts selling things from the back of his truck and he's selling designer clothes, there's probably something fishy over there. And so therefore it would be usher for you to start purchasing things from him. And the examples that he gives, of course, we would give the example of buying things off the back of a truck. But the example that he gives, Kagon Shomrei Peiros, Shemochrim Peiros b'makom tsanua. So for example, let's say a guy has a job as a security guard for a farm, right? His job is to watch, to do security for the farm, to make sure that no wildlife comes in and tears apart the farm, and to protect it from thieves and so forth. And then all of a sudden you see him selling produce. Well, he's not a farmer. He just works on a farm. So why is he selling Farmer John's it seems like he's selling Farmer John's produce. Okay, and he's selling it in a private area, like, back in an alleyway. Psst, psst, come here. You want to buy a watch? It's like it's that kind of attitude. Kamo acharei hagina, like behind a garden, away from public view. Oh, shirov hadavar hahu cheskasoganov. So another illustration would be that, let's say, the commodity that he's selling is assumed to be stolen. Kigon roe behemos acherim shemochim chalavu gavina. He says, for example, a person who's hired as a professional shepherd, where the livestock does not belong to him, but he rents himself out to watch over other people's livestock. And one day you see him at the end of the day selling milk and cheese. Okay, well, where did he get the milk and cheese from? He must have gotten it from the livestock that he's been watching. That's the assumption. Sharov haroi mochrim mashagonvim below shalahem. He says, and the reason why there's an assumption of it being stolen is because it's known that this kind of professional engages in stolen property. Below bidas haba, and without the consent of the owner. And even, a lot of times, sometimes the owner of the livestock, even though they're forced to look the other way, because they recognize that, it's what they call shrinkage in the grocery industry or in the retail industry, that things are going to walk away. And sometimes you just have to write it off as the cost of doing business. But that doesn't, so that even if the owner had yeyush, but there was no shinoi rishus, it's still in the possession of the ganav. And so therefore you still would not be allowed to benefit from it. So asr liknos mehem o lehanos mehem b'chinam. You're not allowed to purchase those items. nor are you allowed to even receive them as a gift or get any benefit from those commodities. Okay, so that's the first statement. Aval, but, so under what circumstances would you be allowed to buy? That if the person who's the professional security guard or shepherd sells the produce or the milk at the entrance to the garden, in the middle, right in public view, and it's clear because he's got a basket or a measuring cup or some other kind of weight or scale right in front of him. So it's clear that he's open for business and he's doing this out in the open. So then mutter. So then you are allowed to buy from him. Because then you can assume that since he's doing it out in the open, the owner will become aware of his activity, and he's not intimidated, he's not afraid, and the owner will certainly find out based on the fact that he's doing this so publicly, and therefore we must assume that he's doing it with the consent of the owner. And the same is true in all other similar situations. The kulan sha'amru lahakona mehem hatmein asr likach mehem. But an exception to that is that even if a guy's selling it out in the open, but he tells the buyer, "Hey, buddy, hide that away after you leave my shop. Don't let anyone see that you bought it from me." Right? So then that's also a clue that he's dealing in stolen goods, and therefore you should not. You're not allowed to buy from him. Okay, so I mean, basically, it's common sense. I mean, it really is just common sense that you're not allowed to say, well, I don't know, just because he's selling it off the back of a truck and it's got a sticker that says Walmart on it. How was I supposed to know that it was stolen property, right? Or and so essentially that's essentially what the halach is telling you. The halach is telling you is that you can't just abdicate a personal sense of responsibility by saying that it's that guy, he's the ganaf, and I've got nothing to do with it. No, there hasn't been, either there wasn't Yeush, or there wasn't Shinai Rishus, unless you know for sure that there was both. And even then, it's highly unethical to benefit from goods that you know are stolen because you're helping to perpetuate this kind of business, right? So we talked about this before when we talked about intellectual property as well. Buying $1 DVDs of movies that came out a month ago from the Chinese mall, is not legitimate either. Okay, all right. So let's take a quick look at the Imrei Yaakov. We're going to have to hold it for just a moment. Sha'asur lehanos, you're not allowed to benefit from stolen goods. La'achar yeush b'shinoi rishus, unless it's after yeush and it's no longer in the ganav's property. Da'az nikna hadarver lahalokeach al makabel matana, because when you have both, then the item that was purchased from the ganav no longer is in the original possession of the owner. And as we've explained before, it only becomes a financial debt that the ganav has to the original owner, but the actual good itself, the commodity itself, is not considered to be usher anymore. Just that the ganav at that point has to pay what he stole. Okay, so kach usher lehanos v'huadin liknos kamoshakasav b'hemshech. Okay, fine. You're not allowed to benefit or purchase. And he says, Sharov hadaber haluches kasoganav. He says, you have to know that when something is assumed to be stolen based on circumstances, you're not allowed to benefit from it. And before we read this, unfortunately, I have to, as I mentioned to you on Mondays, I have to get to the 7:00 minyan. So I'm going to end it here, and Mirza Shem will pick this up tomorrow. Again, I'm sorry for the short shir on Mondays.